Hello, I'm Dr. Sue. I'm professor of civil engineering at Gonzaga University, and I'm pleased to be a part of this panel, albeit virtually and via this recorded message. But I've been a member of River Restoration Northwest since about 2006, and I was an active member of the board of directors for about 8 years during that time. So I've had a pretty long investment in the organization, as well as in the practice of river restoration. I have been an academic for about 15 years now, and a lot of my research focuses in on monitoring of restoration projects. And looking at the effectiveness of different restoration techniques via monitoring. And so that's what brings me to the lessons learned. That is sort of the theme of this panel. Over the last 20 years, I really have not noticed much of a difference in monitoring and the amount of monitoring that we're doing in our projects. And so I'm here today to share with you my thoughts based on restoration monitoring and maybe sort of the lessons learned and the take-home message related to monitoring. And really the theme of this is, from my perspective, are we still living in a field of dreams when it comes to monitoring our projects and looking at project success, right? So there's lots of information out there currently that has looked back and inventoried restoration projects over the last 20 years or so. First, of course, this whole idea of if you build it, they will come was first put out there in the mid-90s by Margaret Palmer and others, and that the fact that we're making the assumption that if we put this in the ground, that the restoration objectives will be met and that we'll see the success that we had hoped for, right? And so this really hasn't changed much in the last 20 years. In 2005, we know the big science article said that only about 10% of the projects that they included in the synthesis and the national synthesis indicated any form of assessment or monitoring. In 2017, there was a big survey of river restoration projects in the UK, and of 3,000 projects that they collected and inventoried, only about 25% of them reported monitoring. So there's also very little across the pond. Same thing with a Dutch survey. They do indicate more monitoring being done in their restoration projects. However, that monitoring isn't necessarily tied to the restoration project. And so they have a hard time trying to figure out if it's tied directly to meeting a restoration objective or not. And so the data is kind of lacking in that as well. So even over the last, 15 years that you see here in these studies, it doesn't appear that we're doing much more monitoring, right? Or providing resources for that monitoring, right? I think we may all have a really good idea as to why. And if I was there in the presence, I'd probably have you all shout it out. But ultimately, I think we realize that essentially we have pretty vague restoration objectives, which I think we can improve upon, but setting restoration objectives so that they are specific and detailed to be able to set up a monitoring protocol to test them. So we need a little bit more detailed or smart restoration objectives. It's really also hard to know exactly what methods or protocols to use to monitor, and there really isn't much standardization across the board to be able to then compare across projects. So that makes it a bit of a challenge. And I think the number 1 and 2 reason that probably popped into your head is that it's time consuming, right? It takes a while for restoration rivers to respond to the restoration practices, right? To then be able to document if they're being effective or not. And you can see in the figure in the right here that ultimately for a different restoration measure, you may not see any kind of benefits for at least 5 years, right? Or maybe even 10 years, or maybe even more. So realizing that it is time consuming and it takes a while to collect this data, that makes a really big challenge to monitoring our projects. And then of course, money and costs, right? It's expensive. There's usually no money allocated, or money runs out, right? So you get to the end, you implement, and then you have no more money to monitor. So all of these challenges have led to, I think, to this persistence of sort of this field of dreams idea when it comes to our restoration projects, right? And so they have remained, I think, looking back and reflecting, I think I've noticed that it's been pretty much monitoring stays a pretty low priority in most projects, even though projects are adapting and evolving and getting more complex, right? And so monitoring is messy, but essential. And I think it's a key to truly tying together the science and the practice, and showing the effectiveness of several different types of restoration methods and projects and the like. And so I think it's pretty important to think about this idea that our projects are evolving, but the monitoring isn't necessarily there to sort of show their effectiveness. I think there's hope. out there, right? Work is now being done to prioritize monitoring and develop more standardized monitoring methods that can better focus resources, right? Particularly like maybe highlighting certain types of projects or large watersheds, such as intensively monitored watersheds, and work on monitoring those projects that hopefully you can spend the time and the resources on, and then the results can be expanded out to other projects then, right? So sort of focusing that effort is, I think, important in order to getting this monitoring done and to helping us better understand the science and the effectiveness of our restoration projects, right? And so we see this with the flagship project of Wychus Creek Stage 0, and that they are implementing monitoring protocols to look at if they're meeting their restoration objectives on this more complex, messy system, right? And then, of course, the intensively monitored watersheds, right? So my number one take-home message and lesson learned in this is I think we all need to ask ourselves, if you build it, are you sure they will come? Right? So not making that automatic assumption that if you build it, they will come, right? Prioritize monitoring, find partnerships and collaborations that can help you prioritize monitoring, right? Citizen science, work with nonprofits that are collecting data in the field, right? Universities, right? We do a great job. This is our bread and butter, right? In order to do research and monitoring. So see if there's ways to establish those collaborations to help, right? Publish your results, pay attention to other published results that are coming out, learn about what is working and what's not, and then adaptively manage and evolve. And so I hope that we can sort of prioritize this monitoring effort into the future to help us learn a little bit more about our projects and sort of advance the science in practice. I thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to speak virtually to you all. This is kind of challenging, stuck behind a screen, as I usually like to run around and have lots of energy and enthusiasm in the room, but hope that has come across, and I wish you a great conference, and I'll leave it in the hands of the rest of my panelists here, because I trust they will carry this panel through to a great discussion. Awesome, and thanks very much, and if you have any questions, you feel free to reach out to me anytime. Hope you all have a good remaining conference.